Hello, everyone. Welcome to a Monday night. This is a very special night because Alexander and Jay-Z want to discuss identity politics and astrology. And I thought it would be a good time to invite Thorn back to this group to discuss identity politics and astrology or also because that's one of their kind of specialties too. So I thought we could have a good discussion about identity politics in general and how that applies to astrology. So let's start with the question of how do we define identity politics? Okay.
Jump in.
Well, I think when you start talking about identity, that's so individual that it's your expression in a community of other humans. And then when communities of humans get together and they're discussing topics like their identity, it gets maybe a little controversial, or people try to explore sameness and differences, and then that's becomes political.
Okay, so what's the same, what's different is one thing that could cause like a political discussion. I would say that identity politics is the politics around identity itself, right? Politics suggests something that there's not one clear answer to it, that it causes discussion, it causes controversy, right? So there, like anything political means it's something that can incite discussion, right? So I think identity politics is anything surrounding identity that causes a dissension or a discussion, or there's not one clear side, and like you said, it kind of deals with the interface between one human and society at large. It's like it's that one many interface thing. Thorn. I would also add that just to expand with that, with my view of where, for example, if there's similarities like in identity and gender and expression and gender identity, deaf culture, whatever it is, that's rooted in the same values. There's similar values there, and that opens more of a discussion of how are humans the same and sharing identity, and sharing, values and a perspective. And do we want to approach the system, the political structure, uh, you know, there's politics around identity or gender or whatever type of issue it is. There's the politics that applies there, and then vice versa. If there's an authority figure, let's say they say, how do we want to deal with this group or this community? And that goes both ways because that's the root of the values is where we're showing a certain frame, of expression, and identity. And there's a political view and a kind of, you know, interfaces there. So that would be my thoughts.
I think identity also is rooted in um, several categories, like what you feel you have to do become this thing, what you feel you want to do to become this thing, what you feel you don't want to be, and so that becomes your identity, or what is new and exciting for you to join a group of people and share their identity that was not an identity that you had.
Oh, that's true. There's individual identities and then there's group identities.
Yeah.
Okay. So is gender identity political? Gender, and why?
Well, I have found it to be because people who people are tend, if they haven't met other people with a variety of genders and are not part of the binary cis frame of mind, the people who have never met anybody outside of that are very rigid in their perspective, and they tend to come up with statements that make it a political thing.
Yeah, sure. I would also add that the queer community, and there's queer history and then queer theory, you know, our identity is, is overlaps with that very strongly. It's with the root of politics and, liberation and being radical and, with our view, because if we look back in history, um, where our community has to, you know, let's say in the 1960s, the community had to step up. And of course before, but I mean, but that, that's when the visible world saw that at Stonewall. That was the point of politics where it really became clear. It was right there, with people who are black or brown or mixed or BIPOC and who are leading that kind of liberation or that revolt in that space. And also there's other people who are involved with that too. Um, there was at the same time, it's interesting to see where the other threads were, where they added those different threads, because if we didn't have that, happen, then our current, modern day view, with politics, identity, it would be like it'd be rooted and it'd be, if we didn't have that, then I don't know if it would be as visible. So I just feel like it's important to really recognize that. I'm just putting that out there. Okay.
Yeah, I think it needed to get political because minority groups needed legal protection to have the same rights as other people. And the way that we make laws is through, in this country, is through our political system.
Yeah, so people had to fight for the right to identify with what gender they wanted to, or they felt inside. I mean, it wasn't, so I do think this points to the fact that identity is political because we can say whatever we want about our identity, but cult or community or culture at large has to accept that, right? It's like you could say, like, well, I identify as a turtle, or I identify as a pair of pants, and then people have to accept that identity. You can't just identify as whatever you want. I think it becomes political to just say I am X, Y, or Z, right? So people at Stonewall were fighting for the right to say I am whatever identity, so that was kind of an identity liberation fight, right? Um,
Yeah,
Go ahead.
I have to say they weren't just fighting for the right to be able to say that. They were fighting for the right to not get the shit beat out of them.
Right.
They were,
By New York cops.
yeah. So it's, I think, uh more than that. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, Lumiere, did you want to add something? And then I'll add
Oh,
something.
well, I was just, yeah, it was political because it wasn't about, at that point, it wasn't about identity. It was about a group of people who had explored identity, found their identity, that what they liked then, and then they were trying to they used politics to make sure that it was open to other people and to make sure that the New York cops wouldn't beat the crap out of them. So it became political because they were being oppressed. And it's not tantamount, but it's similar to any older identity. For example, so in the family of stonemasons, no kid was able to ever say, I'm not going to be a stonemason. I don't want to be a stonemason. I want to play violin because that's my identity. That's what I feel in here. I want to play the violin. And everybody, the family would have all gone like, so, um, I feel like being yourself, finding your own identity, um, because of Stonewall, gave everyone a chance to start to think about who I want to be. It was not a luxury back in the day, just like being happy wasn't a luxury back in the 1890s. And now we can say, well, I'd really like to be happy. But, you know, Victorians never thought about it. So Stonewall pushed everybody.
Okay, so just to add to that, it's interesting there's two things there. One is how Stonewall pushed that open, for people to really, look at it and say, my identity, who I am as a person, what do I want to be? What do I want to become? And also the community at large was, looking at individuals the same way or similarly, with gender identity and advocating for that and working together and saying we can push for this. But then also in the 1890s, in the Victorian age, where, you mentioned that in the family there, the in
Inherited. You
like it's
inherited.
like the Freemasons or the stonemasons or whatever, they each, their father would give down to their son and all that generationally. Oh, the inheritance there. But anyways, it was very rigid and, concretized, that identity. So there was no way to break free and be open there. But, for those people who decided to really leave that binary thinking where they were stuck in that identity, they would leave that and then the family would be, all up in arms and say, no, but, no, you can't. And then there would be an oppression of those people who decided to kind of leave the family because at that time it was very radical to look inward and say, I'm not happy with this lineage. I'm going to change my identity to this other thing and to match who I am as a person. And, because like in Stonewall, there's no open discussion for identity, or self, what can, I do to be happy. In the 1890s, there was no open discussion with that as well. They had to develop that social consciousness. It was very rigid. You have to have this one way. There's only one way. So I think it's fascinating to see how that, evolution occurred between culture, society, and all these things. And it's very related and, overlaps. You can't separate one thing from the other. It's impossible. Okay, so let's bring that discussion to astrology. People, often diminutize astrology to be this woo-woo thing. But today we're going to elevate astrology to say it is identity politics, just like these other things, because it is giving an identity to people, saying, Lumiere, you're a Scorpio, so you should be all these things. And Thorn is a Gemini, and they should be all these things, right? And so telling another person who they are is identity politics. I mean, so what do you guys think? Is astrology identity politics? Could it be? What do we think there?
Well, I have a question about that. So on Sunday at your place last Sunday, not this Sunday, your friend, the singer, when you said he's a Scorpio, she said, yes, I get that vibe. And so what does that mean, that I'm stuck in that identity, that I will always be noticed as a Scorpio by those who have the skills to notice me, and there's nothing I can do, and nobody will ever say, "Well, I think you're a Gemini."
Hmm. So what do you guys think? Are we so see how it's similar to say like you're a Scorpio, where it's like saying you're male, you're female. I mean, I think it's similar, right? To tell a person who they are. So is that as political as gender or not? Why not?
Well, I think that what Lumiere is saying is it pigeonholing me, right? And
Partly, and do I have any options?
well, I think it's a little bit slippery with astrology because I feel like if Andy had said, "This is Lumiere, he is uh a Virgo," and you were dressed very neatly and your hair was all combed and your shirt was buttoned, and then the person would be like, "Oh yeah, I totally see you as a Virgo." So I think astrology is some archetypes, right? But we are not just one of them. And that's what astrology teaches us too. Like your sun sign might be Scorpio, but your moons and rising also come into play and all of the planets. And so I think astrology is really a balance of the different archetypes that we've divided the wheel into.
So I don't have to just look at the Scorpio things and say, "Okay, I'm this, and this, and there I am."
No, it's not quite that simple.
Thorn. I just want to add that it's interesting for me because if we looked at this history where, horoscopes originated or where that they were, being written from, the rising sign, um, you have to understand a long time ago they wrote them from the sun sign. So it's like that's where people sometimes get confused, saying which is which, and oftentimes now I will look at my rising sign and I'm like, oh yeah, that is spot on all the way, but my sun sign in the horoscope, it's like someday it matches, and some days it doesn't. So I think it's interesting to see how astrology has that fluidity, uh, that Jay-Z is saying, it really is, there's a diversity of the archetypes and, it's not only just one D, it's, like you were saying, there's the rising sign, there's the moon, there's all these things. And, it creates a whole. And it's not only that, I would also add to say, for me, with my journey and experience with astrology, it's very energetic, and it's a vibrational thing that, I'm very sensitive with that time of type of, vibe, so, I can kind of tune in to, a specific, perspective of a person with their, consent, of course, it's like, do you mind if I tune in with your energy and see your sun sign, can I feel this or not? But always I check in anyways for consent. But the point is like it's not only, it doesn't define a person, is it political? I would say that there's some influences that are political, but it's not there's some influence. Astrology is not the only influence. Okay, well, if a person is a Scorpio, can they just identify as a Gemini? Yes or no, why or why not?
See Thorne
They're
laughing.
born on a Scorpio day, but they say, I just identify as a Gemini.
On Tuesday, I'm a Gemini.
Thorn. I would say that's sticky because if the moon sign was Gemini or if the rising sign was Gemini, that would make sense with that, code switching into those different parts of the identity. But you have to understand again that when it, you know, when you're born, you know, on the horizon, I mean, there's some math and numbers that are not involved, but when the sun and rising and that, you know, I mean, it's very numerical, you know, the science itself. So, you know, there's a time that the person's born and that's the sun sign that has an actual thing mathematically. It's a thing. So, you know, is Scorpio, if you're truly a Scorpio sun, then you can't just say, well, I just am a Gemini, right? I'm just a Gemini. It's really sticky. Just putting that out there.
Yeah, I think like you can say whatever you want. And on the other hand, there is meaning to words. So I think I would ask the person if like there are certain qualities of that other sign that they feel like they associate themselves more with, and try to have a deeper conversation about why it is that they feel like they're a Gemini. And like Thorne said, it might be other parts of their chart that are ringing through. Or it might be where the planets are now, that they're sensitive to those vibrations, and that's what they're taking on, the feeling of that. So there could be a lot of things going on there.
Well, I want to bring up the point that the chart is genetic because we call it Genesis, right? So, you know, some people say your gender is genetic. You know, if you're an XX chromosome, then your gender is female. If you're XY, then your gender is male. But the, you know, the queer theorists and the gender theorists have detached the genetic component from gender, right? They say your gender is whatever you identify with in your heart or your spirit. So there's gender constructionist people who some people say gender is a performance. That's Foucault, right? So I think you know, the identity politics of astrology is not to be taken lightly. It is genetic to have a specific chart. You know, so can you detach from your genetics? You know, astrologers try to do it all the time. Relocation charts. Well, I moved to another place, so I'm going to make a new chart, you know, or solar return chart. I'm this chart for this year. Or, you know, so people try to change their charts in subtle ways all the time. This happens all the time. I don't like this chart. I'm going to tweak it to this other chart, right? So it happens in astrology or
What is the outcome for that?
or house systems. They say, well, I like this house system better for my chart. So I pick it. So there are ways where it's flexible, like gender politics, but it seems that you guys are saying there's something tangible and mathematical and real about the chart, just like chromosomes. I mean, you know, okay, sorry, Lumiere, go ahead.
No, no, I was wondering if that happens, what is the outcome? If people say I'm going to use a different chart to guide me, I guess that's what they're looking for, guidance, right? So what happens then? Does something actually happen? Is their outcome different?
I mean, Thorne, what do you think when people relocate their chart? How does that change their life course? I feel that it's fascinating with astrology, you know, with cartography, astrocartography, where they relocate the chart to a specific type of chart. You know, it's a tool, but we have a list, you know, of where there's grid lines on space on the Earth, and there's like the sun line, the moon line, there's a Venus line, and all these things, but it's different in the different place in the world where it aligns with that specific line. So if we're going to move over to this place, you know, you could say that reflects on part of the chart, you know, there's so it allows you to kind of grow or blossom more in that aspect of your personality or something like that, or what you need to experience and how you can get through that and then move to a different location. And so if you move to a different location, will light up a different part of the chart. So I feel like it's not only about the need to be guided, but it's all about humanness and the experience of each part of the chart. And, so if you relocate to a different town in the same country, you might, it would reflect a different thing, but you have to feel like, is it wrong? It's not wrong. It's just a different frame, if that makes sense. Well, one of the reasons I don't like when people make a new chart is because from a teleological perspective, the birth chart is your life purpose and path. And the transits around it are the unveiling of that path. So when people make a new chart, I'm like, you just messed up your telos. Like your life purpose is now messed up. Like you don't have that chart. But I kind of a rigid, ancient, like I'm just kind of a rigid as an astrologer. I'm more rigid than I would be with gender or anything. I'm just kind of strict on that one. But there's different astrologers who have different opinions about that.
But you think it's inflexible, right?
Well, I don't think it's that flexible, but that's my opinion. Thorn. For me, with the birth chart from that day, that you're born, that really shows where and why you're meant to be here. And so that's not, fixed. If you made a new chart, then it's like it's not a different birthday, but it's more like showing the evolution of identity or the evolution of self and the experience with that exact date. That could be considered more of a transit, with that experience of identity. So, or whatever. But I think the point is when you're born, with that chart, is it fixed? Yes. But at the same time, with a different transit that you're in, it could show where the planets are hitting you currently on your birth chart. So I do feel that it's important to follow that balance of, if you have a new chart, do you throw out your old chart? No, that would really throw things off. It's a whole balance. So just throwing it out there.
Well, what do you guys think about what do you call that? The Nagashampa, whatever it is, the difference between where the planets are in Western astrology and in Vedic astrology right now?
Oh, the Ayanamsha.
Oh, Ayanamsha.
Could
Ayanam.
you spell that for me?
It's Ayanamsha. And it's 23 degrees. Like in India, they have on the news, they'll be like, the current Ayanamsha is 23.2 degrees. And they kind of like always reporting on how far the spread is from the tropical zodiac to the sidereal zodiac. So what do we think about the two different zodiacs? Well, I would say that the aspect infrastructure of both charts is the same. So, if you have a Sun square Mars in one chart, you still have a Sun square Mars in the other chart. So I would say the aspects and the transits to them is one thing we know that we know. Like you are genetically predisposed to have your aspects in your chart. The two zodiac question, yeah, that's a thing. I mean, that's a whole show, right? But I think, yeah, I mean, maybe we could look at that as gender is constructed in different ways in different societies.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking, that like maybe a different culture would look at similar traits in a person, but they're like off a little in their cultural interpretation of I don't know, the behaviors that a person might exhibit with those traits. I don't know if I think that's true. That, Scorpio to Libra, Libra to, yeah. What do you think, Thorn?
Well, I would also add that with that mention of the other cultures, we're looking at different, characteristics of a person. Maybe there's different, frames, and I agree. There's many different cultures that have that, third, fourth, sixth gender, for example. There's different identities in different cultures. There's a lot of diversity. There's open-heartedness, open-mindedness, whereas Western is very binary, but other cultures have a different way. So I think it's just interesting to see how there's different frames, focusing on the physicality of identity and and there's different perspectives that could be applied to their experience, within society and culture there.
Yeah, yeah, I'm just taking myself as an example. Uh, if my Pisces sun trine my Scorpio Mars would shift back to an Aquarius sun and a Libra Mars. And maybe if I was living in, say, India, I would be more community oriented and have more like one-on-one relationships, partnerships. I don't know.
Well, I would say that because of the identity built on you by the astrologers themselves, that is true. I would say that it's that feeding of identity information to you about yourself. It's like that manifestation theory. What you
Yeah.
envision is what you become. I think that would be true, more true. Like this, the narrative and story we get depends on our culture and our chart.
Hmm.
And one of the reasons I don't like to back up my chart to my Vedic chart is I'm sticking with one narrative and I'm going all the way with it. Like I don't like to bifurcate my narrative, you know what I mean? So, but I'm very strong as a futurist person. Like I'm always building a future. So I like a strong narrative and I don't like to mix up the two. But I think, yeah, I think some of it's manifestation theory.
And your identity is strong in you, so you never question it, and you don't jump ship when you're in some other place that where your identity wouldn't be as welcomed. For example, my example, I'm on the cusp unit. So, from what little I know about astrology, and you could barely fill a shot glass with what I know about astrology, I often would tell people I was Libra like, and then I would tell people I was Scorpio like because it depended on the group that I was with. But you don't do that. You don't. You are who you are, who you are, right, Andy?
Well, I identify as a Scorpio because I'm on the cusp too. I'm a
Yeah,
2947 Libra. But the reason I identify as a Scorpio is mathematical because I'm a Gemini rising with Mercury in Scorpio conjunct my sun. It's actually a math reason I identify as a Scorpio. I'm like, if I was born 9 hours later, I'd be a Scorpio. But that's where you can identify as whatever gender you want. I think a cusp is similar where it's like you can identify, I mean, in my perspective, you can kind of identify with one side of the cusp if you want. I mean, but some people are rigid and they say, no, you are a Libra. So there's some genetic people that are just, it's math only, So I think that's a good parallel to the gender discussion is the cusps. I mean, what do you guys think of that, Thorn? Well, the reason why I was laughing is a little bit is because I do love, 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 love cusp babies. I love them. And I do always tell them that especially, well, because I feel that it's a beautiful assignment of their chart, because it shows their willingness to explore both parts of the equation. So you have to understand that more of where there's a balance there. That's a journey with both sides. And I think that the cusp it's really a thing, actually. It's interesting. because when there's other astrologers and they say like, no, and they're really strict about it and they're kind of concrete about it. And I'm like, well, for me, in my experience, in my journey, and what I've learned, it's always fluid. Because I'm trans and I'm queer and I'm non-binary. So of course I do abolish those things, in general. So I think that's a frame thing. And I do feel that it's very, very fluid, that space. And you have to understand that there are some specific areas, for sure, there's specific things that are, just concrete. And I think there's other things, with astrology that are more, it's a balance though. Some things are more fluid and some things are more concrete. And I think some things are more flexible. So putting that out there. Okay, I have a case for you guys. Okay. And why I think identity politics is very important with astrology. Okay, let's say we had a violent person. There may be abusive, they keep having violent episodes, domestic violence, something. And in their chart, we saw something very violent, like a Moon, Mars, Pluto conjunction in Scorpio or something, right? And then, well, they say, so we said it's in your chart to have, a violent, character, right? And they say, well, I don't identify with my chart. I don't identify with having that in my chart. Is that problematic? Why or why not?
Did they punch you in the face when they said that?
I punched them in the face. No, I saw it coming.
Don't fuck with Andy.
Thorn. So I would comment that it's Mars, Pluto, Moon being conjunct, like, oh, that's tough. That is, especially if it was just in that chart and it was really concretely there. I mean, I think if there's a transit that hit that, that means that they need to know how to, follow their transits so they know I will have this disposition to blow up at this time. And I think how can we work with it to not, what's the word I'm looking for? Not just be big headed and like, I'm going to do this because I want to, but it's more of, I know that I have that tendency. So how can I humanize myself and understand that, as not, how can I not hurt other people through this transit cycle? So it's compared to a person who's just, flippantly, egoic about, being a certain way. Like, I'm just going to be this certain way. And then we have to recognize it and say, okay, is there any way I can fix this or grow through this or help this person? And maybe it's not necessary to fully remediate that. But I think how can we improve the situation? So, I mean, that's a sticky situation. That's difficult. That's tough to fully remediate something. But yeah, that's my 2 cents.
And conversely, you might have someone that says, this is who I am. I'm violent. What can I say? You can't do anything about it. I can't do anything about it.
Well, I mean, is it okay to have a violent offender just be flippant and just keep being violent? Is that okay?
On my block.
I mean, we put them in prison. I mean, if they keep doing that, they get put away.
Yeah.
I mean, is this similar to a person saying they get labeled as BPD or narcissistic personality disorder or something, and they're just like, no, I'm not BPD. No, no thanks. Is that similar? Thorn. I would say in that case, if there's like a label of BPD or whatever, because that's it's a non-medical diagnosis. I mean, or let's say it's a psychological, diagnosis. If the person was not willing to accept or understand that that applied to them and they just were just like, yeah, no thanks, and just being flippant about it, then I think that there's that acceptance part that can be difficult. If people are just say, yeah, no thanks, I don't accept that label, flippantly, then I think we would have to be more um we'd have to be more willful and we ignore.
That, that
I didn't catch that either. But
is the
yeah,
G.
but anyway, but I think with if there's these explosions, these violent explosions, then I think maybe that's different. It's a different level of nature. It's like it's because of course with this society that we have the police and we have prison and we have all these things. And I think it's related, to capitalism and, money and the authority to decide who's right and who's wrong. And if we continued to, you know, if people are violent and we're going to put them away and they're not going to rehab or we're not offering these other choices, then they're going to degrade internally. And I think that, there'll be a loss of self in that. So I think I feel that it's more necessary to work around it in a different way. So,
Yeah, I also think that like what you were saying before, Andy, like people are gonna be who they are. And so they're gonna be that. And so if they would be prone to not wanting help from somebody else about something that's making their life in society more difficult because that is their personality, then they're just gonna be like that. And it's up to us, though, as a society to let people be who they are, and then also there be consequences so that we can protect the rest of society, right? So it's just gonna play out the way it plays out, you know? And so, yeah, maybe people wouldn't even be open to remediating something because they don't think they need to, or they don't see the value in that improving their life, because they don't think it will improve their life. So you can't force them.
okay, I have a story about this. So, one person I worked with for 17 years on different projects and we shared a life together had a Sun Mars conjunction in Leo, which is very abusive. It's aggressive, wants to be obeyed. It's just like, like in your face, kind of like salty personality, like, but because that person accepted my notes that they had a Sun, Mars, and Leo, I said, your chart is abusive, and they would accept that, like, oh, I'm Sun, Mars right now. I can feel it. We were able to be together for 17 years because they accepted and they didn't they didn't deny that they had it. They were like, yeah, that's me. For sure. I am abusive for sure. Right. So I could work with that person for a long time and enjoy them. I'm like, oh, because it would be on time to the transits. Like all of a sudden the transit would hit and there that personality type just started to come out. And I'd be like, oh, it's Sun Mars time. And they're like, oh yeah, I can feel it or whatever. So I just thought it was interesting how much that benefited this person to accept and acknowledge the genetics of the chart. Like it made it palatable for me to accept it. It was just really interesting. But then people who deny it, like, no, that's not me. It's just a different story.
Yeah. Did when they accepted it, did their identity change?
No, I mean my one beef with that person is they never learned transit watching. They never learned AR, like astrological remediation. They never learned how to manage the energy. They just kept doing that behavior. So I think I needed them eventually to go to another level and start managing their own energy. But they just didn't. Thorn. I think also I want to add that also the influence of how that person grew up, how what their background is, what the influence in the family structure is, because the environment will also feed in to how, the understanding of how we can accept or not accept or, refuse to accept certain things. All of those, you know, have, a relationship or, no relationship to what we're mentioning. But I do think it does have an influence because at the bottom line is that there's going to be a connection to the current experience. And unless if someone decides to shift that and say, oh, looking back, that really didn't help me. That environmental situation or this information, might benefit them in a certain way. And so then maybe they apply that information and transform through that piece of information. So I think all of those need to be considered. Okay, we have 3 minutes left. Does anyone have anything they want to bring up about identity politics and astrology?
Not in 3 minutes, but I feel like we could talk about this for a long time.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Yeah, I want to also add that now there's more queer identified people who are also astrologers, and a lot of them are popping up more and more. So I'd be curious to see how that shifts what's happening currently with culture. And I'm curious to see how what that expands and diversifies the situation. I want to say queer people love astrology. And I think I agree. And I think the reason is they are used to identity politics and they love identity politics. Many queer people are also neurodivergent and they just think and think and think about everything. Whether it's they've been forced to think about it because of their queerness or if their tendency to think about it led them to being queer. I don't know, but I do think queer people love identity politics. Well, I mean, some. Okay, Thorn. And also, can see that some of that, I do notice, it trickles in with deaf, blind people, the deaf community, because a lot of people in the deaf community, queer, trans people love astrology as well. And so I think there's a lot of different ways that they connect, and it's cool to see how it impacts all those different types of people, not only just one group, but all the different groups. Yeah, it's funny because on the Ricky show, he's more cisgender, jock culture, and they call him the weird one because he likes astrology. And I just think that normie culture is not like associated with identity politics. They don't want to discuss their identity. They're like, I'm a man. That's it.
Right.
It's like they don't want to discuss it. But Lumiere is more on the identity politics side of being a male. And so he loves these topics, the philosophy of life itself. So I just think that's interesting.
And I don't want to be strapped to one. I then like, here's my identity. I got up this morning and it says I should be this. I'm not going to do that.
All right. Well, thank you all for go ahead, JZ.
I was just going to remark on Lumiere's desire to not have strapped on identity.
All right. Well, that's a good place to end it.
Except, every other Friday night.
All right. Well, thank you, Thorn, for joining us tonight. It was great to see everyone. Thorn saying thanks for having me. All right. And thanks
Good
for
to see
the
you.
topic, Lumiere. All right. We'll see you all.
Yeah.
All right. Bye.
So, yeah, bye.